What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 11 DFS MVP podcast. I'm your host, TJ Hernandez, the director of DFS at 4for4.com. As always, with my co-host, John Daigle, Pat Corain. How we doing, boys?
Doing good. How you guys doing?
Accommodating my Friendsgiving tonight, which I got stereotyped as the Texan into doing the meat. And by the way, they are correct. I know how to.
Yeah, well, that's not stereotype. Don't you cook good meat?
I know how to brine and roast a turkey overnight, so
Yeah.
they were correct.
Beautiful.
So yeah, we were just accommodating me today.
Yeah, so thank you for all the viewers catching us at an earlier hour. As always, we'll bring you guys all the goods, and anything you missed today, you could come back Sunday morning for the Discord show, which we've been rocking in the 4-4 Discord, Daigle and myself, 11 a.m. Eastern time every week. As always, before we get into everything, just want to remind everybody that if you want to prep for the week, probably the best way to do that is through the walkthrough on Pat Crane's Legendary Upside. Go through game by game there. Pretty much every single angle you can take the game apart from. Crane, any highlights from that before we get into the slate here?
Yeah, I think this week's pretty interesting because we'll kind of get into this as we go, but there's a number of spots where the matchup's really good.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're looking at an offense, you're like, man, this defense does not stop what this offense does well in the passing game. But then you kind of step back and look at the overall game environment, and it's like, is there actually going to be enough, pushback for, the offense and the good matchup to actually kind of put the pedal to the floor and attack aggressively? And I think that's the real question in a number of matchups this week, and kind of figuring out which of these games can have a little bit of a back and forth action, or an offense who's just willing to aggressively put up points through the air without much, a pushback on the other side. If we can find those spots, I think there's there's offenses that can really put up points this week.
Yeah, it seems like damn near the whole season we've been looking at shorter slates, low scoring slates, and just hoping we could find a game that pops. This week finally feels one where we have quite a few games that can pop. As you said, there's definitely some wide range of outcomes on some of these games, but some pretty healthy totals both on the team and the game side. 11 game slate. Never love when they split it 8 games early and 3 games late, but it is what it is, and we got some nice late swap opportunities with some of those late games. If you guys want to check out the detailed walkthrough, there is a link to that in the YouTube description, alongside promo code YouTube to get you 25% off at 4for4.com/plans. That is off the already rest of season discounted price. And once you get that 4for4 sub, upgrade to the solver, the best optimizer in the game. And when you do that, all of the 4for4 projections are automatically synced there. Let's get right into it. As we mentioned, got a few games with some nice totals. Maybe 11 weeks ago, we wouldn't think this is the game that's popping, but this is the game that's popping early. Texans versus the Cardinals. Early kickoff here, 1 o'clock p.m., 48-point total. Texans favored by 5.5, 26.75 team total for Houston. Arizona, 21.25 team total as the underdogs there. Crane, as I mentioned, this game is expected to be not only one of the highest scoring on the slate, but one of the highest owned games on the slate. Lots of really good values on both sides, with Devin Singletary likely leading the way as the mega chalk in this game. What you noted in the walkthrough is that Cardinals are a team that can be exploited in those splash zone targets we've talked about. And Houston is a team that is very prone to throw those splash zone targets. Big news here, Nico Collins coming back from injury, and he was kind of leading the way for the offense in those targets. So with Noah Brown out, probably some Tank Dell chalk here. Does this stand out as a Nico Collins game, assuming he is back to 100%?
Yeah, I think this is a pretty interesting spot for Nico Collins for sure. I also think it's an interesting spot for Tank Dell. I think it's kind of interesting to talk about Robert Woods even as a salary saver. Dalton Schultz is interesting. I don't know how chalky he'll be because you're looking at like some big Trey McBride chalk. So I don't know if people are going to want to go double tight end from the same game. So that might keep him in check a little bit. But this is one of those spots that I was referring to where like the Cardinals defense is very bad, and it's specifically bad at stopping what the Texans want to do. They don't protect the middle of the field well, but they also are allowing the most EPA on first read throws per drop back in the league. And that's another thing that Houston is really excelling at. Like, this is an offense that is being executed by Stroud the way it's drawn up. And the Cardinals aren't forcing quarterbacks to move off the primary design of the play. They rank dead last there. So, if the Texans are aggressive, I think we could see them put up a lot of points through the air. The problem is that they really don't appear to be an aggressive team. They've been conservative in most of their games this season. They did shift to a passive approach versus the Buccaneers. I wouldn't put it past them to do that. It would be really fun. But I'm more interested, I think, in kind of attacking this with Kyler and then bringbacks coming back, because I think that's the way this game's really fun, is that the Cardinals come to play, and the Texans, they're not going to shy away from a shootout if it heads that direction.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. We just got the official Noah Brown news about 45 minutes before we started recording here. Early on, as I mentioned, Singletary projecting for really big chalk. Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz kind of in that moderate range. Interesting to see what happens with Nico Collins with Noah Brown out. I have a feeling he probably gets steamed a little bit more than we're projecting him now in those single digits. But as Crane mentioned, Daigle, the big news on the Arizona side is Kyler back. And as you mentioned on the Most Accurate podcast, not the most efficient throwing day for Kyler, but we did see Arizona throw at the 13th highest rate relative to expectation after being 5th lowest in the league without Kyler for the first 10 weeks. Another thing we saw from Kyler that was a little unique compared to those first 10 weeks is him getting the other pass catchers involved, most notably Rondale Moore, Marquise Brown, not with a huge target share, but did miss, a deep target for a touchdown. I don't think he stays as, the fourth most targeted player on the team, but looks like, Kyler gave us some running ability. They trust him to throw already more than we're used to from this team, and a lot of players involved. So what do you make of Kyler and company this week?
And I think the most rostered player under 4K in terms of a wide receiver will probably be Jalen Guyton. But I do think Rondale Moore is the most interesting ancillary piece around Marquise Brown and Trey McBride. Trey McBride's going to be played in cash games, and you really can't get away from him, honestly. The Texans are even allowing a league high in catches per game to opposing tight ends, so no reason to run away there. Marquise Brown, I'll be curious to see where his ownership gets. If people are that pissed off about the missed touchdown throw from Kyler, maybe we can sneak him in a little bit, even though his salary just doesn't budge like Tank Dell's on DraftKings specifically. They just don't move those two guys at all. And so they just continue to be good plays. But Rondale Moore is really interesting because we did see the second highest target share for the Cardinals last week, 25.8%, but it wasn't the dinky 5.2 depth of target that he had under Cliff Kingsbury. It was over 8 yards average depth of target. And so now we're getting, we think, volume and some deep shots under Jonathan Gannon for Rondale Moore. That's super interesting. So I'll be curious to see where people land between Moore and Michael Wilson. Michael Wilson's being targeted because of his share of the team's air yards. I think he may, it sounds crazy, but in tournaments, I think he may get steamed just a little bit. I think he could actually probably get quite more rostered than Rondale Moore. And if that's the case, I'd rather play Moore. So I'm just trying to see where everyone's going with this game. Definitely one, at least for the Texans side, though. I'm willing to play like 2 players without CJ Stroud, on-slot CJ Stroud, just trying to figure out where ownership's going to go with it.
Yeah, this is a tough spot from projecting ownership, just because we have obviously Trey McBride is going to be mega chalk on a slate without the 3 big names on the slate, Kelsey, Hawk, and Andrews off the main slate. McBride at 4,400, he's just going to be owned a ton. But Wilson, Rondale Moore, Marquise Brown, all kind of in this like high teens range. Usually we don't see all 3 players get brought along. So I do agree with that. Like, at least one probably gets more steam than expected and one gets squeezed more than expected. It'll be interesting to see who that is. Michael Wilson, 3,400, Rondale Moore, 3,300. So, I mean, definitely a game that's going to come down to a lot of what the ownership looks like when we get kickoff.
Crane, would you do Stroud, Woods, Schultz, Dell to get off of Singletary.
Yeah, I mean, I like getting off of Singletary and playing it through the passing game.
Mhm.
I think you want to bring back, like, I don't really see the Texans just like coming out here and smacking the Cardinals through the air and the Cardinals not putting up points. Like they will shift to the running game, I think, if the Cardinals lay down. So it's tough because, you know, that as you guys are laying out, it's maybe a little bit harder to figure out who the right bring back is. I'm okay playing Trey McBride though. You know, I would be totally fine doing a Stroud double with Trey McBride. You get off Singletary. I think my question is, like, there's a lot of chalk projected in this game, but how do people play it with the quarterback? Are people going to play Kyler over Stroud? Because that allows you to get Singletary in. And I don't think people are going to want to play Singletary and Stroud together. I mean, Stroud's pretty expensive. So, like, how does this all shake out ownership-wise is, I think, the question here, because this is a really enticing game. And I'm fine playing it, like, however. Like, you tell me how you want to play it, and I'll pick a different route. That's totally fine here.
So we're playing James Conner, is what you're saying.
Well, actually, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Kyler's the highest roster player in DK optimals right now. Trey McBride, top 3 tight end value on both sites. Devin Singletary standing out as the cheap running back option in cash games. And then, as we mentioned, just a lot of cheap or valuable pass catchers in this game. But yeah, I think probably, as Dago said, it's probably a pretty good spot to look for some onslaughts instead of just trying to pick and choose who it's going to be and just building through it logically, right? So not exactly being like who's the best, who's going to hit, but like who hits in a way together, I think is going to be really important here. Next game that we're looking at, also a 48-point total. Lions favored by 7.5 at home against the Bears. Lions with a 27.75 total, with Bears at 20.25. Another return from injury. Last week we saw Jahmyr Gibbs come back, get more than 50% of the work. Obviously, David Montgomery had that huge run. So, you know, if he stays on that drive and gets whatever 5 more touches, it's more of a 50-50 split. But Lions probably not getting a ton of ownership here besides that healthy total near 28. Chicago is bottom 10 in schedule adjusted points to both the quarterbacks and the running backs, but a lot of that damage that has been done against the Bears defense by running backs has come through the air. So Dago, how do you see the Lions benefiting here if they do hit or exceed that 28-point total?
It has to be through the air. You can't run on the Bears at all. Even David Montgomery last week, I felt like there were a lot of performances last week where we should really just say, okay, I got away with that one, but we can't go back to that. The Seahawks offense and DK Metcalf, I think, is one of them. Man, if you saw that first half, and I'm someone with X amount of dollars in cash gains on Geno, and I saw that first half, like, oh no, like what have I done? But luckily he went 6 of 8 on the last drive. DK had that 44-yard catch on the last drive too. Otherwise, we weren't getting there at all. Quentin Johnston scored that touchdown on a 10% target share in a game. Keenan Allen and Gerald Everett left injured. It's like, okay, we got away with that one. Kenneth Walker, a 64-yard touchdown catch on terrible usage. Okay, we got away with that one. And then also David Montgomery, last 2 games with Jahmyr Gibbs, he hadn't handled less than 70% of the team's touches and 75% of the running back carries. He was at less than 50%, and he had the 75-yard touchdown run. So you're like, okay, we got away with that one. It just doesn't seem like in this spot that that's something I want to chase, whereas the Bears, you can attack them through the air in terms of the running back. They're allowing 6 catches and over 60 receiving yards per game to opposing running backs, and Jahmyr Gibbs ran 22 routes to Montgomery's 11 in this last spot. So to me, like that's a one-way street for their running backs. I don't want to touch Montgomery based on how he's used, but I'm more than willing to go to Jahmyr Gibbs in tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, going into last week, let me see if it's still there. Yeah, the Bears allowing the most receiving yards to running backs, by a mile. 2 of their 3 linebackers ranked near the bottom of the league in coverage grade among linebackers.
And literally first in yards per carry, 3.2 yards per carry allowed to opposing running backs. They've been awesome against the run game.
And I won't get into the theory here, but as Daigle mentioned, some of those spots, like the Geno spot late last week, we got some really interesting late swap theory last week in cash games. I typically hold when we have PMR in cash games. Last week was a very unique situation. So again, I won't get into it here. If you're in the Discord, go back and look at that conversation because it was a really interesting theory based play. I whiffed and my side didn't work out, but I thought it was a really good discussion. So that's some of the stuff we got going on in the Discord.
And just remember some of the shakeup for tournament ownership whenever news like Joe Burrow and Ja'Marr Chase come down. Like Joe Burrow then was no longer a cash game option. He still got there if you wanted to pay up, but you knew the field was coming off of him and then going to Geno or Brock Purdy instead, which then heightened Geno's ownership in tournaments because he was a cash game play. Not to mention then, because we had no value at receiver, which was the thesis behind Quentin Johnston, Jackson Smith and Jigba also then became 15 to 20% roster. It's like you would never play JSN at 15 to 20% in tournaments. So you just have to be aware of these shakeups that happen that trickle down from cash game pivots into tournaments.
Yeah, it was a fascinating week, and it was one of those weeks where we definitely needed the discourse in Discord because I mean I was struggling to figure it out, so it was nice to bounce some ideas.
I didn't have mine until literally 10 minutes before lock.
Yeah,
and I was like, okay, I guess I am scared to fade Christian McCaffrey. I'm not scared of anyone else in this slate. Let's just do that. Yeah,
man. This game with Justin Fields returning is a lot more stackable, obviously, than it would have been otherwise. That is the biggest news of the game, just Fields returning, and as has been very apparent, DJ Moore splits with and without Fields have just been night and day. Obviously, he has that massive 49-point game in there, but also 3 100-yard games with Fields versus none without. So Corain, I mean, DJ Moore is projecting as one of the best values on the slate. Fields pretty decent value against one of the biggest pass funnel defenses in the league. So, I mean, is this the game that we can be looking at as like a contrarian stack with the same kickoff time as the chalkiest game of the week with Houston and Arizona?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because when you look at like Justin Fields in some of the advanced stats like EPA per game and success rate, he looks worse than Tyson Bagent, really. But Bagent is kind of doing this manufactured BS, kind of scrambling around, hitting some plays, hitting some short throws. Fields has been pretty boom bust. He's been really, really bad in some games and really, really good in other games. So, for tournaments, that's a much more appealing profile, obviously, and provides a real ceiling to the offense. I read this a little bit different than Dago on the Lions side, where I don't think the Lions are going to be afraid of the Bears' run defense, even though they have been quite good against the run. The Bears are second in EPA allowed per rush and first in rushing success rate. So they're like a legitimately strong run defense. But this is like a Dan Campbell identity team. Like they're not going to, I think, back down and say we need to pivot to the pass. They've been, against the Buccaneers, they did go pass heavy, but they didn't have their running backs in play. That was the game where I keep mixing it up. They were without Jahmyr Gibbs and Dave Montgomery. That's the game where he got hurt. And then they pivoted to the pass. So, I don't think they're like stubborn about running the ball necessarily, but that's definitely their like primary method of attack. I think they'll give it a go at least. So I think I like this most from the Bears side. And then you bring back a Lion is a really nice spot for Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think, he's pretty expensive, but he's got a high ceiling here for sure. And I like the Jahmyr Gibbs call too, because I think you get the out actually that they do run the ball quite a bit, but they do it through Gibbs. Like we saw last week, him getting a pretty big workload there. So then you also obviously have the receptions. So that's how I think I want to play this. Probably, Justin Fields. I think maybe you can double it with Cole Kmet too. I think he's in a pretty interesting spot and someone that gets a big boost from Fields coming back as well.
I'm not even saying you're wrong. Like I agree with the sentiment. The Lions could run the ball. My thing is, if it doesn't go through Gibbs and the Lions do run the ball, this game fails. This game
Right.
environment fails.
Right.
And so
right.
thus we
That's a
don't
good
get a
point.
ceiling performance from anyone, which is why I've been back and forth in this game. Because again, it's like the Bengals Texans conversation we had last week where CJ Stroud got there, Joe Burrow got there, but they didn't reach their ceilings and they didn't win tournaments. We're trying to poke holes in how does this one get to its ceiling? And I could definitely see this one failing overall for sure.
It's a riskier game than I
absolutely.
think that the Texans game is, but that's okay. Like I think the Texans game, we could see that get spread out a little bit, and maybe that's one way that it doesn't win tournaments, even though it probably doesn't like fully fail. But this game has a much lower floor, but I do think it has a pretty fun ceiling.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about if you do choose to like stack this game, if you played Fields doubles with a bring back, whether it be Gibbs or Amon-Ra, most of the players in this game, you are getting a legitimately a fraction of the ownership of players in Arizona and Houston. And a lot of time, like our traditional late swap versus the chalk like concept is go contrarian early, hope you hit. If it doesn't switch off of the late chalk. This week we got the mega chalk going at the same time. So I mean, if you do play Lions and Bears heavy and it hits while Arizona and Houston misses, like you have so much information on where you're at versus the field with only 3 games left, that you really can get into it. Obviously you still have to do good and be in a position to have a good day at tournaments, but have some really good ideas on how you can swap or where you can hold for, game theory versus the field, just because so many players are going to be played early. So I just think from a tournament game theory perspective, this is a really interesting game to be playing.
None of the mega chalk is late though, right? So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, we won't. I think the only none of it's mega chalk. The only like chalky players we're getting late is like probably maybe some 49ers.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Brock Purdy probably is the cash game play this week because he's so cheap and it's an amazing spot.
Purdy and Kyler will probably be neck and neck for the most popular quarterbacks of the week. The only player in Lions Bears that's getting like real cash game consideration is DJ Moore. Gibbs is just one of those players that like he's just never going to project as like a good median value just because everyone's always going to project Montgomery for some workload. But this is like a pretty weak running back slate. So I haven't really built out cash this week. I don't know if I would put Gibbs in as a cash play. But like there aren't like slam dunk values. There's like upside at running back, but like there aren't a lot of like slam dunk values that I'm just like running to play. So like again, like it might be another 2 running back cash week. I'm still not sure. I got a lot of thinking to do.
Where are you at on the Singletary play? Because I mean he is underpriced.
I mean in cash game I probably just play him. But
you have to. I mean, he's handled all but 3 touches the last 2 weeks without Dameon Pierce. Pierce did return to practice
every year. He just takes over the whole backfield every year.
Pierce did return to practice on Friday. Yeah. If Pierce plays, I would get off Singletary, at least in tournaments. Also, we're 100% getting Brian Robinson in cash because Gibson, again, didn't practice today. So you just slide him in and lock him in. It's going to be so easy to play him. We'll figure it out by Sunday morning. Some injury news to watch.
I was hoping Robinson was going to be a sneaky value against the Giants, but doesn't look like we're going to get that. Doesn't look like we're going to get that at all. Just play running backs and defense versus the Giants.
Singletary objectively, if Pierce is out, like it's not just for the touches either. Like last week, the Texans showed us who they still want to be. Like even last week, they were 7th in run play rate on early downs, except they played the Bengals. So unlike the Bucs, when they averaged under 3.5 yards per carry on early downs, the Bengals suck. So they average 5.7 yards per carry on early downs. And it's kind of the same thing. The Cardinals are 20th in yards per carry allowed on first and second down. So if the Texans want to have their way doing that again, Singletary is going to get there.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating that like this super chalky game that everyone's going to be playing through the passing game, we also have to fade a mega chalk running back. So it's like you can't even root for the game to fail through the kind of dusty running back because he's going to be the highest owned piece of them all.
Yeah, it's a tough one to figure out how to play against it for sure.
Stroud, Schultz, Woods, Dale. There you go. That's how you have to do it.
One of the late kickoff games with a pretty intriguing total is the Seahawks at the Rams. Seahawks favored by 1 point in a game with a 46.5 point total there. 4:25 p.m. kickoff. So this is like the ultimate late swap spot. 23.75 team total for the Seahawks. Crane, last week we saw Geno Savage's fantasy day late. But as you mentioned in the walkthrough, he's probably playing a little bit better than people realize. But just obviously the production hasn't been there in a huge way like it was last year. The thing against the Rams, as you mentioned, is teams like to get there through their running back. So, I mean, if we're looking at this game as one that can pace up and one that does have potential shootout, like how does it get there with people running so much against the Rams?
I struggle to see this one a little bit, that the Rams a bit of a run funnel, and then the Rams have been more conservative recently, and it makes sense. We actually saw this in the year they won the Super Bowl. They kind of got more conservative as the season went on because Stafford was being a bit erratic, and McVay, I think he'll shift to the run game as needed. In this case, it's because they can't protect Stafford. And, you know, they couldn't really hold up against the Cardinals pass rush when they played them. They went really conservative against the Steelers the following week. They were really conservative against the Cowboys, and then Stafford was hurt in that game. So I don't really see the Rams looking to like push here. The Seahawks have a pretty good pass rush, certainly good enough to harass Stafford, given just how bad they've been at protecting him. And so if they've got a run-heavy Rams team, are the Seahawks the type of team that is going to push this into, you know, a high-scoring game environment? Not really. So this isn't really a game environment that I'm all that intrigued by. I don't really see an angle here either. I mean, there's, you know, a split backfield now. Charbonnet is kind of operating as like a clear receiving back. The Rams double team a lot, so I don't think this is like a particularly great spot for Metcalf and Lockett. JSN's getting a little bit of work, so it's going to make it a little bit more unpredictable. I have a hard time predicting, you know, who would be the guy to play here. It's not really something I'm eyeing small field stuff.
Yeah, with Charbonnet and JSN getting, you know, pretty decent work now, like so much is fragmented in this offense, whereas in the past, even if it was like a tough matchup, we can just rely on it being so efficient and so uber concentrated between DK and Lockett that it does make you a little bit nervous there. Stafford projecting as one of the worst quarterback values on the slate, but we have seen salary come down on his pass catchers. It looked like Kupp was going to like get back to that perennial $9,000 every week range. He's down to 8,100. Puka Nacua down to 7,100. Daigle, as you mentioned on TMAP, there is some ways that the Rams can exploit Seattle and their zone coverage. Does that benefit Puka or Kupp in any way?
I like Puka as a one-off in this spot. Like Karain, I don't know if the environment necessarily gets there, although McVay has hung around against Pete Carroll literally since he was hired. Even last year, they had Baker Mayfield and John Wolford in those two starts, and Seattle only outscored the Rams by 7 total points. And then in week 1, Stafford came out without Kupp and just whipped it around the field, 337 yards at 8.5 yards per attempt. No problems whatsoever. So I could see the Rams offense definitely keeping it up here. And if that's the case and you don't want to go full game stack, I do like Puka because the Seahawks are one of those defenses that play zone coverage on over 80% of snaps. That's kind of the threshold saying that you are not going to change your scheme no matter what the offense does. So that's good. And then we know Puka has seen 61% of his targets against zone coverage for a league high 49 receptions and the 7th most yards per route run. Significantly better, significantly more involved. They're also, him and Cooper Kupp, basically splitting slot duties, and that's where we want to attack the Seahawks, is in the middle of the field, as opposed to Tariq Woolen and Devin Witherspoon, who stay glued to the boundary, which is why the Seahawks are also allowing the fewest catches per game to opposing boundary receivers, because they just stay out there. So yeah, I like Puka quite a bit in this game.
Yeah, I like the idea of mini stacks or one-offs here. On DK, not a lot of players are projecting as very good values. On FanDuel, the Seattle side projects pretty well. Geno and JSN are actually in the FanDuel optimal right now. I don't think they're cash viable, but I always like looking at those players that I don't think are cash viable that pop up in optimals, because a lot of times it just means those are good values that maybe we should be having at very least in our tournament pool. So on FanDuel, I do think if you are going to think about stacking one of the quarterbacks, it makes a little more sense there, where DK lends itself more to one-offs and mini stacks for sure. Going to these games where we have a team with a high total but really big spreads, the team that highlights that list is the Dolphins, 13.5-point favorite against the Raiders. They were the only team with a team total of 30, came down just a touch today, 29.75. Because of that total, the game total is 46.5. Big news here, Daigle. Devon Achane returns against the Raiders defense, ranked 27th in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. And it looks like we might get a relatively low owned Achane coming off of the injury. So is this a spot where we play a low owned Achane, hope he dominates as a big favorite, or can we actually look to some like last week Dallas style onslaughts and hope that Dolphins just completely roll the Raiders?
Yep, definitely very high on Achane, because it's not 4 weeks. It's not injured reserve and then perhaps coming back. It's 6 weeks because you had 2 weeks to rest over the bye. Not to mention that usually when you argue about players coming back and being limited, Achane was already limited anyways. He's a 10-touch guy, but it doesn't matter whenever you explode for 150 yards. On those 10 touches. So, and this kind of slate, I guess he's probably going to be a cash game play too, because it's just something you suck up and say like you're too explosive to hide. So yeah, of course, the Raiders are allowing the third most yards per carry. I absolutely want all the Achane, and I'm probably playing him with Tua and Tyreek. You don't have to get to Tua necessarily, but he's one of those onslaughts where you don't even need to play anyone coming back if you don't want to. Honestly, we're just trying to soak up all the Dolphins touchdowns.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was thinking. Is like, is there a spot where we play Tua, Tyreek, and Achane together? And I mean, we've seen it, right? Like Achane is the type of player when we're thinking about running backs, when we can play them with their quarterback, the natural intuition is they cannibalize each other, so we don't want to play them together. Like Achane is the type of player that if he hits, it's going to be big plays, and big plays just enhance the whole game, right? So that's like, that makes sense for him to be played with his quarterback, where some running backs, David Montgomery is going to slow the game down, and you don't want to be playing him with off.
I wish there were a cheap offense, and maybe it is all those Texans pieces we talked about, but I wish there were like a cheap onslaught offense, and that way I could then start tacking on 2 players from all the offenses I also want the touchdown equity without the run back. Because like choosing between the Cowboys, Dolphins, and 49ers, Godspeed. Like you're just going to have to get lucky and fall into the right one.
These are the weeks where I'm like, damn, maybe I just do play 150
all good answers
for the first time in my life.
This is a really good spot, I think, for the Dolphins offense, like in a bit of a sneaky way, where the Raiders, they take away some of the stuff that the Dolphins like to do. Like they're not a team you generally attack the middle of the field on as much, and they've limited explosive passing plays at a decent rate, but they don't have a pass rush, and so that's I mean, the pass rush isn't terrible, but it's not great, and that's, I think, how you really disrupt Tua. And so it's like, if Tua's in a clean pocket, like, look out, and that there's been some talk of the Dolphins being, somewhat fraudulent. They can't beat good teams. Well, this isn't a good team.
Yeah, Raiders are not.
They can beat this team.
It's like if Antonio Pierce is going to try this highest run play rate in the league shit, and then do that against the Dolphins, and then next time he turns around, he's down 3 scores. Like, good luck, buddy. Like, good luck.
Well, Kareem, what do we think about that? I mean, obviously we've seen they've just been, as Daigle mentioned, just absolutely dedicated to the run. I mean, Devontae is getting his in terms of target share, but catching it from Aiden O'Connell, it's just going to be like, minimal touchdown upside and get his 6 catches for 70 yards, whatever it might be. Intuitively, we don't like playing running backs that don't catch a ton of, actually, Jacobs has been getting a lot of pass game work, but we don't like huge underdogs. As a running back, but like, do you think this is a spot where if the Raiders are just going to like force it to Jacobs that we could play him as a bring back if we do want to play Dolphins?
Yeah, I think he makes sense. It's tough with the salary on DraftKings. I think I might want to do this more in like, kind of the draft stuff, battle royale type stuff, maybe where you kind of throw him as a correlation piece or something. But
yeah,
I'm not sure if I'm going to be on to Jacobs as a bring back here, but it makes some sense to do so because Jacobs has been not all that great as a rusher. I mean, his success rate has recently been better. He's been more consistent as a rusher recently. It's still not good for the season, and he hasn't been very explosive on the ground. But the receiving profile has been really strong all season. He's running back 6 in ESPN's receiver ratings. He's got a 1.38 yards per route run. That's RB10. He's got a 14% target share. That's RB7. So, like, I don't know how to go under Pierce necessarily. Like, we really haven't seen them in this situation, but we know he's going to kind of try to get the ball in the hands of Jacobs and Adams. And if they're trailing and Jacobs has this really nice receiving role, he is interesting to me. Another guy, a little bit more kind of just galaxy brain, and this is probably not something I'd be doing unless like it's super small, a super large field, or maybe this is probably more of like a scroll down play for your battle royale stuff. But Jacoby Myers, I think, is kind of interesting as like garbage time type of guy because he's getting open at a really high rate. So like if things break down and it's not so much about what the Raiders are trying to do, what their offense is designed to do, which I think will probably be to get the ball mostly to Devontae Adams, Myers' ability to actually get open and earn targets is somewhat interesting. At 6,100 on DraftKings, I think I'm probably out though.
My only thing about Josh Jacobs that everyone keeps citing the touches, but he does only have 2 targets the past 2 weeks in this new offense under Antonio Pierce. So,
they're not throwing the ball.
Yeah,
they're not throwing the ball at all.
And the one time, like relative to what they've done, like Aiden O'Connell had to throw the ball last week against the Jets 27 times, and it was Michael Mayer who had a 20% target share. And now in Aiden O'Connell's games, including the Chargers games, it's Myers who has a 12.5% target share. Aiden O'Connell doesn't even look his way. So I think I'd actually just rather, based on like the thesis of how to construct around the Dolphins, because they're so expensive, you then just have to play Mayer as that run back. Not only that, but I want to get a little more highbrow based on the slate. I think what's going to happen is it may lead to 2 tight end builds, and not because it's good 2 tight ends. One, we don't have value at running back. We don't have anything under 5K on DraftKings at running back. Yeah. And exclusively on DraftKings, Pat Freiermuth is the stone minimum. He's 2,500. And he's not even a good play, but it's a matter of what he allows you to do around him. So I could see people definitely playing him just to get up to all the explosive players in this slate.
Yeah, and people that are punting like multiple positions, like you said, they're going to be doing it with pass catchers, but like the cheap wide receivers are going to be owned. Like the Arizona receivers are going to be owned, as you mentioned. Like Guyton might be owned. So like anything that you might want to punt a wide receiver, it's not going to be contrarian. And I hate playing chalky cheap guys. So
yeah.
Again, I haven't done a ton of builds yet, but I did notice yesterday that we saw a lot of 2 tight ends pop up in optimals, as I mentioned last week on the pod. Instead of like trying to fade those, the optimals are oftentimes telling us something that we should be paying attention to. So there's some early evidence that 2 tight end builds.
You could play Mayer over Freiermuth because he's $200 more on DraftKings. You can just do that instead.
Yeah, and I noticed Josh Norris had tweeted out that this offense is shifting more from 21, with the two running backs to 2 tight ends. They cut their fullback, I believe. So
Jacob Johnson, yeah.
So that's an interesting note for sure.
Jacob Johnson was also the Patriots fullback under Josh McDaniel. Go figure.
Yeah.
There we go. Tyreek Hill is always going to project as one of the best values on the slate, regardless of his salary. So if you could fit him in. He is in the FanDuel optimizer. Somehow Dolphins DST snuck by the salary algorithm. 4,200 on FanDuel, 3,200 on DK. So not like super, super cheap, but cheap enough as 13.5 point favorites, where if you could fit them in, they will be a cash game play. Another big favorite this week, 49ers, 12-point favorites against the Buccaneers at home, 26.75 total for the 49ers in a game with a 41.5 point game total. This is a 4:05 kickoff, so not super 4:25 late, but late enough where we should be able to get some late swap spots here if we want to. Corinne, you mentioned this looks like an absolute dream spot for Purdy and the 49ers passing game. Ayuk has been our splash zone basically model this year, and he is your cover boy this week. So talk a little bit about what the Niners can do this week through the air, and two, kind of just the question we're always asking in these spots, like, do they need to be pushed to be tournament viable, or they get there even if they do go in and blow out the Bucs?
That is the big question here is, if we could get, I never thought I'd say this, but if we could just get Mike McCarthy over here, and be aggressive, because they could sleepwalk to 40 points here through the air if they just attack aggressively. Like there's just really, we saw this with the Texans and the Buccaneers. This is we've already got kind of the blueprint of a similar Shanahan style offense attacking over the middle of the field. The Buccaneers, they rank fourth worst in explosive pass play rate against. They are dead last in EPA to the splash zone, that deep middle part of the field. And they don't take away the first read of the opposition. And this is what the 49ers do. They're excellent on first read throws. They're number 2 behind Houston in splash zone EPA per dropback. They have the most explosive passing plays at the highest rate this season. They're the number 1 passing offense in EPA per dropback and success rate. Purdy, what you would say, right, if you're criticizing Purdy, is like he's playing point guard, he's just executing the system. Like, sure, but like the system is designed to attack this type of defense. And the other beautiful thing about this matchup is that the Buccaneers don't really have a pass rush. And the way you can disrupt Purdy is putting pressure on him. And that has been effective. Like the 49ers, they're 31st in preventing quick pressure. They aren't protecting Purdy very well this year, but the Buccaneers, that's not a strength for them either. And then the other thing is that the Buccaneers actually blitz, but they don't do it very effectively. Purdy gets blitzed all the time, so we expect that to happen, but he's been pretty effective against the blitz. So it just all sort of shapes up for big plays, I think. I expect that we do get some big plays here. If we also get passing volume, which is a much bigger question mark, then we could get a ton of points on the 49ers side. I'm most interested in Brandon Ayuk because he is that guy down the deep middle of the field. He leads all wide receivers just ahead of Tyreek Hill in splash zone targets per route. He is second only to Keenan Allen in ESPN's open score, second only to Tyreek Hill in yards per route run. Like he's the big play guy. He's the kind of the way this offense is sort of designed to attack. It's going to go mostly through Ayuk, but Kittle also shapes up as a good spot for him. And it's always scary to play Kittle when they have all of their weapons because the targets are really tough to predict for him. But he is also attacking that deep middle of the field. He's also getting open at a really high rate. He has a 2.25 yards per route run, which is elite. So, all in all, I would say this feels a little bit of a boom bust type of setup, but only because I'm just not sure if the 49ers will put the pedal to the floor here or if the Buccaneers can push back. The Buccaneers have a really low implied team total. Vegas does not expect them to push back at all. And so, if this game could flop, I think, but not because of the matchup, just because they don't need to be super aggressive here.
Yeah, even though Purdy will see, be one of the most popular quarterbacks on the slate, that still only means like 12 to 15%. And his pass catchers are just, unless it's a very obvious spot or one of them is hurt, we're just never going to see Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle all get super high ownership. My only really concern here is that people start building, seeing that there's cheap tight ends, seeing that there's cheap wide receivers, and then realize that they could get McCaffrey in more than you usually can at his salary. And on, again, like a pretty weak running back slate that people are like, well, he's the best player. He's at the top. A lot of casuals just click him because they could fit him in. And he's a little more owned than expected. But on the Buccaneers side, Daigle, if I'm looking for contrarian plays in the spot, a lot of times it's because we're going to have like mega chalk on one side, which I don't think we're going to have. So, is there anyone that we need to force into a bring back here? Like probably the only like obvious value is just Rachaad White with his pass catching ability. But outside of that, I just don't know if he offers us much anyway.
Honestly, that's it. And he does fall in the no man's land. Whereas like last week, he was a cash game option, just kind of made sense around Bijan because everyone wanted to play Bijan. This week, everyone's probably just going to try to get a little cheaper between Singletary, Jerome Ford, Jalen Warren. There are a couple of those guys down there. So yeah, that's honestly it for me. I really don't want to run any of the receivers or even like a cheap Cade Otton for his usage out there against the Niners personally.
Yeah.
This slate would be more fun if the Texans game was late, because then you could pivot from the Cardinals Texans stuff and just go to really low on George Kittle late swap. Seems pretty fun. But it's like, who are you swapping from?
Yeah, that's the tough part is even if we do play like Arizona, Houston, if we get there with it, we still don't really know where we're at because everyone else played it. So we don't know what to do, right? So that's kind of why I'm very interested in games like Chicago and Detroit, because then at the very least, if we do get there with that game and we are ahead of the field and that game whiffs, like we can be pretty confident that like we have a chance to like stay ahead of the field and maybe we don't have to go like way off the board late.
I don't think anyone's going to play Kittle anyways, Corinne. I think you're totally safe.
No. I know I'm safe. I know I'm safe with Kittle, but I'm saying I would like it more if I was behind and come off the Texans game and go to Kittle. Yeah,
that's what was annoying about last week, is there were a lot of people who late swapped into the Cowboys passing game, and it's like, no, you don't deserve it. It's like I'm on the trail. I'm on the trails in Chicago running during the snow, and then the spring comes along, and the families and the strollers and the skateboarders come out. It's like, no, I work for this. You don't get the gratification of my work. Like,
if you live in Chicago in the winter, you earned the nice weather, man.
I was on the Cowboys passing game. You bums are on Tony Pollard. Get off of this. Let me have
skateboarders out here catching strays. That's crazy.
Or Davis Maddox.
Purdy is the top quarterback value on DraftKings in this game. 49ers again somehow snuck through the FanDuel algorithm. They are not only 4K, but that's kind of cheap for a defense that's favored by 12 points. So 4K top value for DSTs, 49ers. Other big favorites this week are the Cowboys, 10.5 point favorites at the Panthers, 42.5 point total, but the Cowboys are at 26.5. Daigle, I mean, people are just gluttons for punishment. I mean, it's another weak running back slate. Cowboys are huge favorites. On FanDuel, Pollard is still cheap. On DraftKings, he's whatever. People are going to play him on FanDuel because people play running backs on FanDuel.
Dude, people just can't get away from it, man. They keep doing it to themselves. It was funny.
It's such a good matchup.
It's actually a tougher matchup than last week. The Panthers, out of their bye now, 3 games, are literally top 5 in yards per carry and explosive runs allowed to running backs. It's a terrible matchup. So I don't know why everyone's still excited to do this.
Yeah,
the Cowboys.
I hate this game.
Thing, dude. We talked about last week. The Cowboys are still passing at the league's 6th highest rate with a 2-score lead. Like they don't use the running backs, and then everyone's like, "Oh, if Tony Pollard falls in the end zone, well, guess what? He can't." Whereas Rico Dowdle came in, got 1 goal line carry, and fell into the end zone because he's better. So no, it's like if you're going to give me the passing game yet again at lower ownership, we'll just keep on playing the same game in tournaments every single week. Let's do it.
Yeah, this is another one where another early game. I mean, I don't think we're going to go, obviously crazy stacking this game. But again, kind of that same theory holds. You have a team with a high total playing against the game at the same time with just a ton of mega chalk here. So, I mean, from a tournament theory perspective, like early contrarian lineups just kind of make sense because it's the only way you're going to get info.
I would absolutely be open to the Pollard thing. Absolutely. If we could get him at 5 to 7%.
Yeah.
But right now,
well, he's kind of chalky again, isn't he?
On FanDuel, he will be. On DK, I don't know. I think it'll be like moderate, but he won't be. I don't. Again, just like such 5. Big favorites, he won't be like 5. I don't think.
DK, they still kind of hit his price. He's still a little expensive on FanDuel. Even I'm going to suck him up and play him in cash because he's so cheap. That's totally fine. But dude, we can't be playing 15 to 20% Pollard in tournaments. You just can't. You have to stop doing it. Correct.
Well, the thing is, like, so I played him 2 weeks ago, and he was like 9%, and that's the game, where he
that was
had
also a good
felt
running back
back.
slate, though. That was a
It was
good
a good running back slate. Yeah.
So it was like there was like 5 guys with like high
That's right.
projections. He was the one that got squeezed.
Yeah, and I don't know if he gets squeezed this week. Although it depends. Maybe if we get Achane steam, I could see him getting squeezed. But I think this. Like, I hope the Cowboys agree with Daigle and think this is not a good rushing matchup anymore, because this is a pretty good spot to attack through the air too. So if they're just aggressive again, I think your Dak doubles look pretty fun.
Also, like JC Horn isn't returning this week. They thought he was going to. CJ Henderson is not going to turn around with his concussion either. So the Panthers secondary is jacked up. The only thing is, and this is more for betting, but I wear many hats because it helps me with my process across the industry. And it is somewhat of a scary letdown spot because the Cowboys do have that important short turnaround and divisional game against Washington on Thanksgiving. And so if they were to let us down, I don't think it would be that shocking. But how would they let us down? Like, who the hell's going to get there for the Panthers? That's the greatest mystery in life.
Yeah, and I mean, there obviously Thielen's volume suggests relatively high expected fantasy points. Hasn't got their last few weeks, so he is a short-term positive regression candidate. But Crane, outside of that, do we even care about anything on the Panthers side?
No, we don't. And Thielen's so expensive. He's not really on my radar. For bring back stuff. It's kind of garbage time. I think no bring back. Dak. You just hope the Cowboys do what they've been doing. Just put it on the other team, even if they don't push back. Given
his price, I think that would be interesting. I think I'm willing to hurt myself for more expensive than Pollard. Yeah, I think I'm willing to hurt myself one more time. Cowboys play man coverage at a top 5 rate in the league, and man coverage nowadays, no one goes more than 45%. No one does it. Everyone's too high safety because they want to make the product terrible every week. But Thielen, at least against man coverage, is 5th in yards per route run. 15th in yards per route run. So still good numbers in terms of how the Cowboys play defense. I think I'd be willing to try it on.
I think Thielen is actually kind of like, he's in a pretty decent spot here.
He's expensive.
It's just the price.
Yep, that's kind of the point, though. It's like he's hidden. Everyone's going to try to get up to CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill. So it's like, I don't know, if I tag along little cheap Brandon Cooks or Jake Ferguson and Dak doubles, I can afford to run it back with Thielen. I'd be okay with that.
The only other game on the slate with a total above 40 is the Chargers at the Packers. Chargers 3-point favorites there. Everything else, the other 4 games, all totals of 40 or lower. The only teams with decent team totals are the Jaguars, Bills, and Commanders. That Pittsburgh and Cleveland game looks disgusting. Daigle, anything pop to you as other games we should be looking at this week?
No. I think I'm going to hone in on how to play 3 to 4 players from either Dolphins, Cowboys, or 49ers as my core, and then what I'm going to do with Texans, Cardinals, chalk. That's kind of what I'm focused on right now.
Crane, players that are like popping as decent values are like guys like ETN, Dalton Kincaid, Brian Robinson again might be mega chalky. So like maybe we're looking for a pivot in that game, but like no one outside of the big games is projecting for ownership where it's like we need to be really coming up with some leverage game theory options. So any of those other games that we haven't touched on do anything for you this week?
Not really. I think the Chargers-Packers game is one that's sort of a worse version of the dynamic that we've talked about, where, if the Chargers want to attack through the air, they should be successful here against the Packers defense that's pretty middling, doesn't have much of a pass rush, but Packers are a bit of a run funnel defense. Packers are trying to play conservatively themselves, so not super interested in that game. If it's like, I love Breece Hall, but Zach Wilson's running back is always chalk that I am willing to fade. So I don't know. It's a difficult slate in some ways because the chalk is kind of in that one game, and so it's not like it's easy to know where else to pivot.
I tried to wrap my head around the Jordan Love thing because I was like, can I get away with this? But dude, like I've taken on a lot of bad play. I played Taylor Heineke in some lineups last week. I've taken on a lot of bad plays in my life. But dude, Jordan Love is so bad at professional football. I cannot get that. I cannot.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I'm not doing it.
at like the Heineke, like those, like we're getting leverage off of like Bijan Chalk. Like at least you're getting something there, right? Like with these other games, like you're just not getting any leverage spots to really be going after.
And I
like,
worry about the Chargers, like Keenan Allen being banged up.
Yeah,
like what's that offense? What the hell are they gonna do?
Yeah,
on the road too.
Yeah. Shout out to Matt Harmon's reception perception graphic of Quentin Johnson. That was a beautiful, beautiful thing to see.
It's not
only the players projecting is like fringe cash game values. Brees and Brian Robinson are both projecting as pretty good values on both sites. Etienne's projecting as a good DK value. Dalton Kincaid projecting as a good value on both sites. Super crazy punt play. Kyle Phillips on DK is projecting as a decent value, just as stone cold min. Before
can I throw something out? Sorry,
yeah, for sure.
This is just as we're kind of trying to get a little more galaxy brain. Like you can attack the Titans through the air, and we've talked about them, being a pass funnel for a while, and then they're not really pass funnel anymore because you can run on them now. Mm-hmm. But I could see like Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram. That's like a potential contrarian double. I just don't know what to make of the
Jaguars offense at this point.
Dude, man.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Trevor Lawrence's highest finish in fantasy is QB 10 this year. Like he's been awful for fantasy. Evan Ingram doesn't have a single end zone target. Like where they use him, like it's just the worst for fantasy too. Yeah. So I hear what you're saying. I tried to think about ETN too, but it's like ETN and Tony Pollard's results are the same, except ETN has fallen forward for touchdowns.
Right,
ETN
he just gets
hasn't been
touchdowns.
good outside of touchdowns either. Yeah. So I don't know, man. I did think about that though.
Yeah, I mean,
we probably don't need to go there because there's enough other contrarian stuff, but wanted to mention it.
I do think it's a good week to be contrarian at running back. I just don't know if like ETN gets squeezed enough, even coming off of the gross game last week, like given his workload compared to just the rest of the league. I just don't know if he comes in low owned enough that I want to play him. I think people just kind of like initially be like, oh, they look so bad on offense, but then they start really looking at the running back slate and realize, well, there really aren't that many good plays anyway. So just end up falling on him. I don't see anything that stands out of the big games. I think the biggest leverage point of the week is going to be either, like Dago said, how you handle Houston, or if you can just get contrarian early and just get way ahead of the field early and do enough late to bring it home. Before we get into our favorite plays of the week, want to remind everybody about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Go to prizepicks.com/DFSMVP and use code DFSMVP for a first deposit match up to $100. Looking to get back on the right track this week with a 3-player pickup, starting with Jacoby Myers, 37.5 yards, receiving yards. Like him for less than that. So much of the passing offense going to Devontae Adams. And as we've mentioned, Antonio Pierce just wants the Raiders to run so much. So even as big underdogs, Jacoby just not getting the yardage that he was before Aiden O'Connell took over. As Karain mentioned, this is not a spot where we expect the Chargers to have to throw it a ton and not a team that is going to pace up with the Packers. So Justin Herbert for less than 262.5 passing yards. And then Breece Hall is the Jets offense. Teams have been able to succeed with their running backs against the Bills. Breece Hall for more than 88.5 rushing plus receiving yards. That 3-player pick 'em if it hits. You can 5x your money. Don't forget to go to prizepicks.com/DFSMVP. Use code DFSMVP for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Let's get into our favorite plays of the week. Karain, start with you and your favorite quarterback.
Brock Purdy. I know that he's, kind of in cash game consideration.
Yeah.
But I don't really see him getting like super popular in tournaments because once you start going to the stacking partners, it gets a lot more difficult. So He's I think like he's definitely underpriced. That's why we're talking about him cash consideration. I like him most with Ayuk. I think Ayuk is going to be pretty low owned. I don't. The tricky part is I would love to tack on a double. Debo's a bit expensive to do that. Kittle's pretty expensive, so that's the tough part about Ayuk or about Purdy. But I think just a Purdy to Ayuk single is definitely interesting for me this week.
Yeah, Purdy definitely in cash game consideration, top 3 quarterback value on both sides. But again, like that, his ownership isn't going to get out of hand, and we don't like super stress about quarterback ownership. It's more how under those pieces going to be with him. And outside of CMC, probably just not a lot of ownership there on the 49er side. Daigle, who are you looking at this week?
I talked about Dak Prescott's spot, and it's the same thing as last week. Also, I thought it was interesting that Brandon Cooks popped up with that season high 22.7% target share. They used him in motion a lot more too, like how the Dolphins use Tyreek Hill to where you get the guy going at full speed before the snap. That way, the moment he hits the cornerback, he's already running right past him. That's how they started using Brandon Cooks last week. It was really interesting. I don't know why it took until week 10 either to do that. So in a slate that's starved with value in tournaments, because as you mentioned earlier, all the chalky players are like less than 4K wide receivers, less than 5K on FanDuel. I think Brandon Cooks also kind of fits in doubles with CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott too, if you want to pay up at those positions.
Yeah, it's crazy. After, as I already said, after all these weeks of like struggling to find offenses that could hit, now we just have a ton, and we got to try to figure that out with Mega Chalk early. Kyler and Brock Purdy are probably like the most obvious cash game options this week. Since Crane already mentioned Purdy, I will mention that Kyler is very much in cash consideration, obviously in that great game environment. And, first game back, and he's already given us just enough of his legs that probably only grows as the season progresses. And for season long, folks, Kyler Murray, super easy playoff schedule. Go to running backs. We talked about the pass catchers in this game, Daigle.
And I like quite a few running backs on this slate in the mid 6Ks range, but Jahmyr Gibbs, for all the reasons we talked about, will get lost. It's just amazing a spot since the way you attack them is by the Bears is by passing to your running backs. We already discussed that. So no one's going to play Jahmyr Gibbs. I do like Jahmyr Gibbs, especially in a week where everyone's only paying up for Christian McCaffrey. There's nowhere else to go unless you start getting a little more confidence in Austin Eckler. If you think Keenan Allen's limited, since at least we saw last year without Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, Eckler averaged a 26% target share. Other than that, though, there's nowhere else to go up top. So Gibbs just kind of slides in.
Yeah, I like that. I think, as I mentioned, I think I'm going to end up probably pretty heavy on that game. Karain, one of the biggest favorites of the week.
Sorry, but with the Gibbs, would you be interested in playing that from the Goff side with Gibbs?
I don't think so. I think I'm open to just one-offing or playing Gibbs with DJ Moore.
Okay. I think I'm going to end up going crazy in this game. I think I'm going to be –
TJ, are you thinking Fields, Kmet, Moore, Gibbs?
Yeah, or Goff, Gibbs, Amon-Ra.
Okay. No one's going to play from the Goff.
I kind of like that.
Well, I think there's just lots of ways I like this bet. Chicago, bad defense. Detroit in the dome. Just at the same time as that Arizona game.
And
get all the love that I have for Detroit out of the way, just because I think Dallas and Detroit every Thanksgiving is the dumbest tradition in sports.
It's the same thing we talked about last week too, that the Lions defense is terrible. They're awful. They just drown bad opponents. Now is Justin Fields in his first game back from injury a bad opponent? I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out too.
Right. My guy's Devon Achane. I don't know. Maybe there's a lot of steam here, so that's a little bit of a concern. But but the steam is going to have to come from people like us, right? Where we're going, you take the leap of faith. We're kind of thinking through this. I don't think it's going to come purely from optimizers and stuff, because you got to take the leap of faith, right? How much work is he going to get? How can you put in efficiency inputs that are bananas? Because that's what he's done so far. But I think you're probably hesitant to do that if you're a prudent person.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it's not like he's a lot of times when we're talking about like these guys that are like getting crazy steam, they're already starting at like 12 or 13%, and then we wake up on Sunday and they're at 25. Like we have him at like 5% right now. Like he's not going to get up to 20 by Sunday. Like he's, like you said, he's just not going to show up in optimizers because like no one's going to project him for 20 touches just because that's not how it works. Like he just, obviously everyone knows about his ceiling, but like he just isn't going to pop in a median projection right now. So I just don't see
it
how
does feel too easy though. Like you have the running back who's literally like running back 1 in every single efficiency metric. He's had plenty of time to get healthy as Daigle laid out. He's in a great spot for the offense, and he's projecting at like 5% ownership. Like that's, I'm like, sign me up. Like, what am I missing? I'm missing that he's actually going to be like 15% is the way these plays usually
it could happen. It's early on Friday. So yeah, it could definitely. People are definitely not as dumb as they used to be. Devin Singletary is the cash game running back, assuming that Dameon Pierce is still out. There just isn't another cheap running back value, easily one of the best values on the slate. So just don't overthink that one. But there are other plays in this game that we can go to, as we've mentioned, and Corinne, you like one of them as the pass catchers.
Yeah, I think Tank Dell is really interesting because I don't really see how it gets out of control. Like he's not going to get forgotten, but like, are people going to be playing him with Singletary? Like Singletary is going to.
I just my concern is people just play this. Yeah, that's my concern.
Well, all right, maybe I'll have to come up with
I think it just depends. Like, are you? I'm like you. We can play 20% guys, right? Like the guy that gets crazy in this game is probably Trey McBride more than anybody.
Right, Trey McBride.
I mean. Dude,
you can pair him with Singletary easily. Like, go ahead, Dale.
Tank Dale's going to get rostered, man. This is the way people play. Like, they just love playing rookies. There's no way to. And again, his salary hasn't budged. Like, DraftKings just doesn't move him at all. You have to play him almost.
I'm not expecting that he'll get squeezed. I just think that.
What do we have?
As getting a piece of this game, like I think he's the most talented receiver at this point. Like he's crushing an open score. I like Nico Collins too, but he's significantly cheaper than Collins, which is a tiebreaker. He's also been running the most routes over the last 3 weeks. I do like that he's a rookie. I think that is fun. Maybe I'm just part of the field there. But if like in this game, which is going to have a ton of ownership, what are the spots that people are really going to get funneled to? I think it is Trey McBride and probably Singletary. Maybe I don't know. Maybe he gets kind of mixed up in that and gets a little out of control. But
these games project for high ownerships because they're good spots, right? Like it's not like we don't have to completely fade it. I like the concept of fading it just because we rarely get this heavy chalk early. These great games are usually later in the slate. But I mean, you could play it smartly. Like right now, I haven't updated ownership projections this morning, but early projections, we had Tank Dell as the most popular wide receiver on the slate. That doesn't mean you don't play him. Like if you play Stroud with Dell and bring it back with James Conner, you're playing it smartly. Like that makes sense, right? Like you're just like, we're probably not playing Dell with Trey McBride. There's like we're not doing that.
Yeah, but I mean,
we're allowed to like chalk.
Yeah, I think you can play him with Dalton Schultz, and that gets you off Singletary too. So if you're off of McBride and Singletary in this game, like, I don't think I want to X out this game. This game could be really, really fun.
No, dude, I'm just figuring out how to play. I'd rather play Chuck Tank Dell than Chuck Michael Wilson, right? Regardless of salary.
I'm onslaughting Stroud with McBride coming back if I play this game. I'm just going all 3. I'm canceling out Nico Collins and his first game back from injury, and I'm saying, let's pretend as if you're limited. I'll go the other 3 guys with Schultz included, and no one will get to that kind of stack.
I love how Daigle's touting Robert Woods right now, but he won't say his name.
There is a receiver who's 3,700 who's not going to be chalk in this game. I'll say that.
There's another contrarian receiver that you like, David.
Who is the other contrarian? Oh, Pat, you mentioned the Jaguars side, and the issue for the Titans is that Will Levis has been awful under pressure, but it goes right back to the copy paste we can do with the Jaguars defense, how we took advantage of the 49ers offense last week. And that is the Jaguars defense is horrendous and they don't get pressure at all. Literally 26th in pressure rate. And so if we don't think Levis is going to get pressured, then perhaps we can actually get some efficient targets to DeAndre Hopkins, who is still leading the team in both target share and percentage of targets seen 20 yards downfield. So no one's going to play DeAndre Hopkins because it was a miserable experience last week. He's there if you want to find like a middle range receiver.
For cash games, DJ Moore is the top overall value below $6,000 on DK. He's one of the easier clicks for cash games this week with Justin Fields coming back. At tight end, as I mentioned, we got none of the big three on the slate, and then outside of Trey McBride, it is kind of just throwing darts. So I don't think you can have a wrong call here. So Daigle, give us your guy.
I mentioned Pat Freiermuth, and again, it's not a Freiermuth's going to do anything. It's going to his first game back from injury. He's playing against the Browns, who are quite literally allowing the fewest points per game to opposing tight ends. It's just a matter exclusively on DraftKings. He is the stone man. So it comes down to, if you're doing tight end builds, what can you do also with Freiermuth? And so that's the way you play it. It's like, okay, I can slot the Stoneman guy who's going to get the reps there. And then you can play Trey McBride. And then what else can you do around that? So just an option.
Definitely not mad at cheap punt tight ends that are contrarian.
Who just kind of got, the only reason he's that price is because they forgot about him. He's returning from injured reserve. Right. The algorithm just forgot about him. No big deal. Like I said, he's not even a good play. It's really just a matter of stepping back and saying, what can I do with this? I don't even know if I'll get there, but it's an option for everyone because it's a misprice.
Absolutely.
My guy is Cole Kmet, and I like this game environment. I think we're kind of eyeing up these contrarian pivots off of the Houston game, as much as I do have some interest in that game too. But Kmet is only 4,100 on DraftKings, and he allows you, I think, to, if you want to play this from the Lions side, you could potentially not use Laporta, use Amon-Ra St. Brown and Gibbs, and bring Kmet back. You can play from the Fields side. I definitely want Kmet there, correlated with Fields. I'll also mention I like Jake Ferguson as a similar type of thing here, where we're going to a different game environment and we get that tight end taken care of. That's something I want to do. I want to be mixing in some of these contrarian game environments, and I love that Kmet and Ferguson let you take care of tight end in a week where the chalky game is going to have the mega chalk at tight end as well.
And structurally, if most people will be playing bully or double tight end because one's cheaper. If you're spinning up at those two tight ends, you are immediately contrarian, but kind of playing the same way, just differently.
Mm-hmm.
I saw some early week content saying Kmet might be owned. We have him like comfortably behind McBride, Ingram, and Kincaid. So maybe I have to dig into that a little bit more, but on a weird tight end slate, like we have Kmet in the high single digits. Trey McBride is the cash game tight end of the week. DSTs, Corinne.
So we're looking at potential for chalky Commanders D, and we're also looking at the potential for Brian Robinson to become huge chalk here. Mm-hmm. So I can, in one move, get leverage on both of those plays by going to the Giants D. And what am I doing? I'm just doing what everyone did for like the first 8 weeks of the season, just play the defense that Sam Howell is playing. By the way, he was terrible against this Giants defense, which will blitz him. He will take sacks. I know where he hasn't taken sacks in like 2 weeks, or he's only taken a few in like 2 weeks, and now he doesn't take sacks anymore. He takes sacks, okay? And
the other, calm down. It's 4 weeks.
The beautiful thing here is that they're going to pass. We want pass attempts against with their defense. You can count on that with the Commanders far more than you can count on it with the Giants. So I'm saving a little salary from going the Commanders to the Giants. I'm getting leverage on, hopefully, if I'm making this move, I want Brian Robinson to be big chalk. Everyone going to him with Gibson out. That makes this play a little more fun.
Daigle?
I think in cash games this week, the defense I use is the Jets, and they're one of the cheaper ones. And I honestly don't know if people use them, but Josh Allen, 3 of his worst 4 performances for fantasy the last 2 years, 3 were against the Jets. The other one was this past game against the Broncos, who have suddenly become an elite unit the past month of the season too. They always had too much talent too to be literally a historically bad defense. They now have an identity. But yeah, offensive coordinator change on a short week. Like, come on, give me the Jets every time.
At 3,200 on DK, 4,200 on FanDuel. Dolphins as the biggest favorites of the week, trying to get them in my cash game lineups. But as always, if you do need to punt and go down to a team like the Jets, that is always viable in cash games. Save that salary there. Again, thank you for everybody that adjusted the time and got with us live today. If you aren't watching live and listening on your favorite podcast platform, we just ask that you give it a 5-star rating and review. It's the easiest way to give back to the podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, please like the channel and the video. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification button so you know when we do go live like today at a different time. As always, links in the description to sign up for everything, including the YouTube promo code for 25% off of 4for4.com/plans. That promo code is the word YouTube. Once you do that, upgrade to the solver. And as always, make sure you are checking out Legendary Upside. Corinne, just remind everybody quickly what you got going on over there.
Yeah, legendaryupside.com. You got the walkthrough, and I narrate the walkthrough on a private podcast feed for subscribers. So if you prefer your audio content, I've got you covered there. And yeah, you can also head over to the site and just check out a free preview of the article. First game, I believe, this week is totally free to check out, which is this big old Cardinals Houston game. So if you want to see if there's any angles people are leaving for you, you can check that out. LegendaryUpside.com.
As always, if you want to keep up with us between content and shows, you can do so on X/Twitter. Pat is at Pat Corain. Legendary Upside is at Legendary Upside. Daigle is at Not J Daigle. 4for4 is at 4for4 Football. I'm at TJ Hernandez. We will talk to you in the Sunday morning Discord.